Hey art fans, thanks so much for tuning in today. I really appreciate you guys being here. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below. It always helps when you do that. I really appreciate it, and it makes us, you know what, just better friends, better pals forever. Forever. You be the judge. Okay. All right, guys, today we're talking about what inspired me when I was a kid. Now, when I was a kid growing up, I grew up in a magical era. The magical era, let's travel back in time now. Time travel sounds, time travel effects. We're traveling back in time to the 1970s. A giant lava lamp just went by. There you go, boom. Now, don't touch it, it's hot. So back in the 70s when I was growing up, I was born in the 60s, grew up in the 70s. So the only place you could see cartoons when I was a kid, because there was no internet, imagine that. Oh my gosh, huge picture of the Edvard Munch picture scream right now. Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone. I mean, imagine no internet, no videotapes, no cell phones, no iPhone, no technology really of any kind. We had a box in the living room called a television set. It was a magical box called a TV set. It weighed about, let me see, what's your average TV set weigh now? About maybe 5 pounds. Our TV set must have weighed 400 pounds. It was one of the heaviest things in the house, and we'd sit in front of this thing. So it was like a cabinet. It was a big cabinet with a screen in it, and it looked kind of fancy, and it was black and white. We thought the epitome of technology back then was black and white TV. There were color TVs. Only the fancy schmancy people had those. If your last name was Fancy or Schmancy, you had a color TV. I grew up on black and white TV, never knowing what color certain characters were. It was really, really weird. I'd see a character on television, think they were green, come to find out they were red. It was, just super strange. Anyway, so in the era I grew up, Saturday morning television was where it was at. Because if you were a kid, wanted to see cartoons, especially brand new cartoons, you had to watch them on Saturday morning. And that's where I saw them, on Saturday morning. I'd get up, I'd be in my pajamas, it'd be 6 in the morning. What you do is you go out to the kitchen, you get the biggest bowl of cereal you possibly can get. My go-to cereals were Lucky Charms, Tricks are for kids, Cocoa Puffs, right? Or there was also Captain Crunch, and then Captain Crunch upped the game by adding Crunch Berries. These little red spheres of flavor that just, boom, got in there. Then there was this Captain Crunch cereal called Orange Quangaroos. Then there was Quisp and Quake, all these amazing, okay, we'll get into cereals later on, but that's what I pour myself a big bowl of that stuff, and I'd sit down and watch Saturday morning TV. And some of my favorite shows on Saturday morning inspired me as a young cartoonist and even carried on into my career as I made Fairly Odd Parents and all the Nickelodeon shows I worked on. And I'll give you some examples. One of the first cartoons I can ever remember watching as a kid was a cartoon made by Hanna-Barbera. It was called the Wacky Races. And the Wacky Races, I think it premiered in 1967 or 68. Wacky Races was a show that was based on a movie called The Great Race, made by Blake Edwards. And that was back in the early 60s. It starred Tony Curtis, Natalie Wood, and Jack Lemmon as the bad guy. Professor Fate! He had like a little mustache. Anyway, all the cars in that movie, it was a live action movie. It was a very, very expensive movie for the day, but it was a huge hit. But every car in that movie was like a crazy, souped up, high-tech car made around the turn of the century, like the 1920s. Like the cars could jack up and they could like fly and all these crazy things. So Hanna-Barbera took that and made it into a show called The Wacky Races. And I remember one of the first cartoon images I ever remember seeing on television were two characters called the Slag Brothers and the Boulder Mobile. They were these two cavemen in this car made of rocks. It was like a rock car. And these guys had just head to toe hair. All you could see were their noses, and they had these clubs. And later on in the 70s, Hanna-Barbera would take that same design and use that for a character called Captain Caveman, voiced by Mel Blanc. That was another show I loved growing up, Captain Caveman. But anyway, going back to Wacky Races, that was just a great show because you had all of these amazing different characters and all these amazing different cars, and every episode was the characters racing across the country trying to get to the finish line. It was a really cool idea for a show, and it really lent itself to the premise of something different's going to happen every week, and there's a goal at the end of every episode. You know, we've got to get to the finish line. You had characters like Dick Dastardly with his evil dog Muttley. He had this laugh he would do, I can't even do it. Paul Winchell did the voice. And then there was a character named Penelope Pitstop, Peter Perfect. There was this lumberjack and this beaver in a thing called the Buzz Wagon. There was the Anthill Mob. There were all these characters in Wacky Races that I just thought were awesome. And I started patterning a lot of cartoons that I did back then off the Wacky Races, and that Hanna-Barbera style is sort of what inspired me to draw as a young kid. It was a very simplified style, and plus it was a style of cartoon I could see all the time. It's what I was looking at all the time because it was on television. I couldn't really afford to go to the movies all the time. Movies were a very big deal when I was a kid. When you went out to the movies, it was a very huge deal. It's pretty commonplace now, but when I was a kid, going to a theater to see a movie, especially a Disney feature, man, that was a big deal. So, but I didn't really see a lot of Disney cartoons growing up. I saw some on The Wonderful World of Disney, but not all the time. So anyway, so the Wacky Races was a big cartoon for me. But some of the cartoons that really inspired me were the cartoons that Hanna-Barbera made, sort of the action-adventure cartoons of the late 1960s. I'm talking about Space Ghost and Jonny Quest, both of which were designed by a guy named Alex Toth, T-O-T-H, almost like tooth but missing an O. So like you missing a tooth, missing an O, Alex Toth. So Space Ghost was a show that I absolutely loved because it was a space adventure, it was realistic, it was like action adventure-y. What I thought was interesting was they made space the color blue. When the ship was flying through space, it was blue space. Like it wasn't black, it was blue. There's two reasons for that. One, we hadn't gone to the moon yet, so they weren't really sure what space looked like. Although they had telescopes at the time, so maybe they did know what space looked like. But I think the blue space was to make things show up better. Like Space Ghost had a black hood. If he went out into space, you wouldn't be able to see the hood. So I think that's why they made outer space blue. He had a really cool ship, which was awesome. And he had two kids traveling with him named Jan and Jace. And in fact, Jace.
Yep, that's me.
Doesn't sound like Jace. It's a different. I think it's a different Jace voice. But Jace, you sound older.
Well, just doing some growing up.
You sound. You know what, Jace? You sound manlier.
What can I say?
That's pretty cool. Anyway, the Jace, I have a Jace here, but the Jace in the cartoon was voiced by Tim Matheson, and he also did the voice of Jonny Quest. Anyway, we'll get to that in a second. But Space Ghost actually inspired me a lot because I carried a lot of Space Ghost stuff into my cartoons later on. If you look at Crash Nebula, which is a space hero, that was inspired by Space Ghost. The Crimson Chin was inspired by Space Ghost. Danny Phantom, in a way, was inspired by Space Ghost. Heck, it's got the word ghost in it. Danny Phantom, ghost, you get the idea. But there was a really cool vibe about the action-adventure shows that Hanna-Barbera created. I also loved a show called Birdman. That was a cool show. There was a show called The Herculoids, which I absolutely love. I really want to remake The Herculoids someday, somehow. I just love that show idea. That was really cool. With Xandor and Gloop and Gleep and Igu the Rock Ape and Tundro and Zoc the Laser Beam Dragon. A laser beam dragon. He shoots laser beams out of his tail. This was Saturday morning. This is what I thought was awesome. And then Jonny Quest was a really special kind of show because that show was sort of it was almost a live action show. It was done on a low budget, on a very limited budget for, because Saturday morning cartoons were very limited back then. But just Jonny Quest was so cool because the writing was great. And the music was great. You had Jonny Quest, you had Haji, his sidekick from India. You had Dr. Quest, you had Race Bannon, this cool sidekick dude that was just a hero that could just beat up anybody, knew how to work any kind of weapon, and he was sort of the caretaker of the Quest family. And the coolest thing of all about Jonny Quest, he had a dog named Bandit with a mask around his eyes, and I thought that was the coolest thing. Even though Jonny Quest was done on a very limited budget, they made it look great. They utilized their limitations very well. Like, they wouldn't make things move too much, but they would just make the drawings look great. And then the stories were great. The stories were great, which is why when I made Danny Phantom years later, which Jonny Quest helped inspire, because Jonny Quest inspired Danny Phantom because I love the name Jonny Quest, and I wanted a name just as cool as that, which is where I got the name Danny Phantom. I was trying to think of names just as cool as Jonny Quest. I always remember at the end of Hanna-Barbera shows, they would show the end title sequence, and they'd have these drawings of the characters next to the credit list of all the people who worked on the show, and those drawings were actual model drawings of the characters, and they looked so great. They actually looked better than the animation drawings, I thought. In fact, back in the late 60s, Hanna-Barbera's animation was actually all done in the Hanna-Barbera studio in Hollywood. It wasn't until the early 70s they started sending their animation overseas, and that to me is where the quality of the animation started to drop. The concepts were great, and the models and the original preconception stuff was great, but the animation itself started to suffer, I felt. So the late 60s Hanna-Barbera stuff really, really inspired me as a kid. I also loved a lot of Sid and Marty Krofft shows when I was growing up. H.R. Puffin stuff I just thought was fantastic as a kid. It was just the weirdest show, and it's like you had to really try and make, and this might sound weird saying this, but as a kid you didn't understand what it was, and you were trying to figure it out. You kind of had to connect the dots on your own. It was a boy lost on an island, and the lead guy was a dinosaur, but he had a southern accent, and then everybody else were these speaking animals, and it was just an interesting show. And the theme song for that show was like 2 minutes long. It was like a 2-minute long theme song for H.R. Puffin stuff. Who's your friend when things get rough? That was a once upon a summertime, just a dream from yesterday. That really taught me theme songs are important too. The Sid and Marty Krofft shows, because all of those had really cool theme songs. There was a great Sid and Marty Krofft show on Saturday mornings. It was called the Krofft Super Show. And that was hosted by a group of characters called Captain Cool and the Kongs, believe it or not. I thought that was an awesome show. It included shows like Dr. Shrinker, Wonderbug. They were kind of like live action cartoon shows. There was Electra Woman and Dyna Girl, which only lasted one season, but it was so cool to me as a kid. There was a company called Filmation that I absolutely loved as well. They did shows like the Groovy Ghoulies, and their artwork always looked great to me. They did the Archie cartoon show, and that was really cool. I was always attracted to the really good artwork and what I perceived back then as the really good writing. And I always loved watching the Saturday morning sneak peeks too. On Friday night, the night before the Saturday all the cartoons would premiere, they'd have a special like on ABC called the Saturday Morning Sneak Peek, and they would give you a sneak peek of all the cartoons coming out the next day, and that to me was the coolest thing of all time. Again, pre-internet, that was pretty cool to get a sneak peek of cartoons, you know, that you would see the next day. So, but anyway, the reason I'm making this video is I want to let you guys know that no matter how long ago the inspiration came, if the inspiration is strong, it will stick with you. If the inspiration is strong, don't be embarrassed or ashamed about where the inspiration came from. If it stuck with you and it resonated with you, that becomes part of you and makes you a stronger artist and a stronger storyteller. All the stuff I watched as a kid, all the stuff on Saturday morning from Hanna-Barbera, Sid and Marty Krofft, Filmation, it doesn't really matter what company made the cartoons or what company wrote the cartoons. If they stuck with me, if they stick with you, then that becomes that becomes your inspiration. And you know, just the fact that I was able to then go into a career in animation using all the stuff I'd learned and all the stuff I'd seen and draw upon that really meant the world to me. And I just hope my cartoons have inspired other people. Do you guys want to hear about some more inspirations I learned from growing up as a kid? If you do, leave a comment down in the comment section below. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Be somebody's inspiration today, because if you guys were inspired by somebody else, you can be an inspiration to somebody else, okay? All right, don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment down in the comment section below. And as always, don't forget, art gives you power. Use it wisely. Hey Heart fans, subscribe here to keep up with me, Danny, Timmy, Dudley, Bunsen, and the NOOG Network, my new app full of cartoons, shows, and games. Download it here. Click over here to watch my most recent video, and here to start a playlist related to this video. Whoa, check out that awesome fan art. To be featured here, use hashtag HeartFanArt and tag me. I'm on every social media platform known to man. Cartoon Butch out. Pencil drop.